Hello, and thanks for attending our presentation. I'm Mike Smith of Kobe University, and alongside my friend and colleague, Chris Samuell of Kyoto Institute of Technology, we're here to discuss our upcoming publication, which is provisionally titled The Path to Global Jinzai, Reflexive Sociological Insights for the Internationalization of Japanese Education and Labour. So, Japan's education system has went through some serious changes thanks to the whole push for global competitiveness. Like a lot of other countries, Japan has been restructuring education and labour markets to keep up with the fast-moving, globalised economy. But there's an extra layer here. Japan is dealing with an ageing workforce, a shrinking consumer market, and this idea that its culture is too inward-looking. To tackle all this, the government has been promoting what they call gurōbaru jinzai, or global human resources. A big part of this was the Top Global University Project, or the TGUP, which was all about making Japanese universities more internationally competitive. This meant pushing for world-class institutions, encouraging students to develop specific soft skills like cultural awareness and adaptability, and most importantly, linking English proficiency with success. Basically, English has become more than just a language. It's now a symbol of being global and a must-have for landing top-tier jobs. And this fits into the larger trend where young people are expected to see themselves as a bundle of flexible skills that they can market in a competitive job environment. But here's the problem. All of this isn't as fair and meritocratic as it sounds. For one, access to things like studying abroad and high-quality foreign language education tends to favour wealthier students. So, instead of levelling the playing field, these changes actually reinforce existing privileges. Plus, this whole narrative that Japanese youth aren't global enough creates pressure to conform to an international ideal, often at the expense of local identities and values. At the core of our research is the question, how do students at a former Top Global University Project college perceive and respond to the internationalization of Japanese education and labour? Using Bourdieu's theory of practice, we look at how structural forces, like government policies and economic pressures, interact with individual choices. By focusing on students at a former Top Global University Project school, we explore how they navigate the internationalization of education and work and what this all means for their futures.
Japan has been trying to close the global human resources gap for decades, launching initiatives like the 2003 Action Plan, Global 30, Go Global Japan, and the Top Global University Project. More recently, MEXT designated Tohoku University as the first university for international research excellence, allocating 15.4 billion yen, or roughly $108 million in subsidies. On the surface, these programs aim to enhance research, international collaboration, and intercultural skills. But beneath that, they align with a broader neoliberal push that treats education as a competitive, market-driven space. Japanese universities operate in a prestige-based hierarchy, evident in TGUP's selection of just 37 elite institutions out of 780. With financial incentives at play, higher education is becoming a quasi-market system where degrees from top universities are essential for securing jobs at multinational companies. Despite neoliberalism's emphasis on reducing government control, Japan's government remains deeply involved in shaping education policy, shifting responsibility onto universities while maintaining oversight. This reflects a broader power shift from bureaucrats to the private sector, including international schools and for-profit education. While this theoretically offers more choice, in practice, competition is fiercer than ever, reinforcing the idea that success depends on individual responsibility, adaptability, and self-discipline. The real issue here becomes access. Those who benefit most are already wealthy, mobile, and well-connected. Therefore, globalization, framed as an economic asset, turns cosmopolitanism into a form of privilege, where success is about leveraging resources rather than just cultural openness. Those who struggle to keep up are often blamed for not being global enough. Ultimately, Japan's internationalization efforts reinforce social hierarchies. It's not just about language skills or study abroad, it's about who gains opportunities in an increasingly competitive, market-driven system.
Thanks, Chris. So, pivoting to our conceptual lens, genetic structuralism, it's basically all about understanding how big social institutions like the state, politics, the economy, and education develop over time, and how individuals shape and sustain them through their actions. It focuses on this constant back and forth between external structures and people's internal choices. In simpler terms, Ritzer and Stepinski talk about Bourdieu's approach to reality, which is all about this dynamic between what people do and the deeper, often hidden structures that shape what happens in the social world. What Bourdieu is getting at is the idea that knowledge is shaped by our practices and experiences. So when we act, whether we're thinking, perceiving, or doing something, we create these structures. And that's what makes genetic structuralism different from the usual way of thinking about reality. Instead of seeing things as purely objective or purely subjective, Bourdieu sees it as a system where both subjects, so people, and structures, institutions, norms, are constantly influencing each other. So he says, we can't really understand how a field works unless we look at its structures in the present, but we can't fully get the structures without looking at its history. So it's kind of like sociality isn't just about individuals acting on their own, but how they are always shaped by this bigger collective history, which in turn influences how they act. To really understand all this, we use something called a theory of practice, which helps us dig into how settings, people's dispositions, or how they think, how they feel, and social norms all come together and influence each other. It's like looking at the full picture of how society works and how it's constantly evolving. But the most important thing is really driving home that there is no such thing as 100% objectivity or 100% subjectivity. It's always a mixture of the two.
So, Bourdieu's idea of fields is all about social spaces where cultural resources and power dynamics are at play. These fields are connected to bigger systems like politics and education, but they have their own rules and hierarchies. For example, in the context of global readiness, educational policies and neoliberal strategies are shaping the labour market, with fields setting the rules of the game. One of these rules is the idea that speaking English and having international experience automatically boosts employability. These assumptions are part of what Bourdieu calls doxa, the unquestioned truths that guide social structures. But habitus is more about the internal, almost instinctual feel we have for these rules. It's shaped by our experiences and social conditioning, and it helps us navigate social situations. Habitus is durable, meaning that it helps us in familiar settings, but also adaptable, allowing us to adjust to new ones. It's so ingrained that we often think of it as natural. For example, people with study abroad experience are often seen as more cosmopolitan and employable. Bourdieu expands capital beyond just money. There's social capital, like networks and connections, cultural capital, which can be objectified, stuff like art or clothing, institutionalized, credentials like degrees, or embodied, skills and habits. These forms of capital help people navigate fields and gain status. Credentials, for example, are valuable depending on how they align with the job market's doxa. All of this ties into Bourdieu's theory of practice, which says that our social actions come from a mix of internal dispositions, or habitus, and external structures, fields. People leverage their capital to improve their position, but those with more capital have an advantage. Over time, their knowledge and status become embedded in their habitus, reinforcing social advantages and inequalities. This is social reproduction, how privilege and capital get passed down through generations.
Okay, our research design. So, we employed reflexive sociological analysis. So, Bourdieu's, as he described it, signature obsession with reflexive sociology is all about recognizing how our understanding of the world is shaped by the social structures we're part of. He believed that researchers should stay aware of this by acknowledging the role of habitus, so like Chris said, our social conditioning, in interpreting data. In other words, research isn't just about understanding how participants make sense of their experiences within their social contexts, it's also about researchers doing second-order interpretation, reflecting on their own position in relation to those contexts. In this sense, Fries suggests that sociologists should first examine the fields and power dynamics behind their research and consider their own role in those fields. By doing so, scholars can better understand the external structures and practices that shape social relations. As Bourdieu and Lacan put it, the goal of science is to uncover how different forms of capital influence the stances of individuals or groups. So, before diving into the subjective aspects of social practices, researchers need to grasp the structural factors and capital flows that shape them. With that framework in mind, we'll now explain how we approach our sampling and data collection. So, after getting ethical approval, we conducted 18 interviews with 9 learners from a TGUP institution in Western Japan, so 3 male and 6 female. We specifically chose global studies majors who were Japanese nationals, had intermediate to advanced English skills, and had study abroad experience. We didn't rigidly control for age, grade, or gender, as we wanted to capture a broad range of perspectives and levels of experiences, and capital. While our sample was small and from a single institution, this approach is common in qualitative studies using Bourdieusian theory. Previous studies with similar sample sizes have shown that this kind of focus can still provide meaningful insights. In our interviews, we used a semi-structured format to explore how students experience and navigated Japanese education, especially in relation to the internationalization of their learning and career prospects. We made sure our interview guides stayed flexible, reflecting the larger social and structural factors influence our participants' experiences. To help shape our questions, we reviewed mixed policy documents and relevant academic work. We also kept reflexive journals to remain mindful of our biases and how we understood the connections between the fields and the capital at play. Before interviews, participants were given information, both Japanese and English, outlining confidentiality, voluntary participation, and their right to withdraw from study at any time before data analysis began. Interviews were scheduled at a time and place chosen by the participants to make them feel comfortable. We conducted the sessions in an informal, open-ended way, letting participants talk freely about their experiences. Our goal here was to listen actively, being patient and open-minded, and making sure we respected the natural flow of conversation. In short, we tried to approach each session with the kind of reflexive, curious mindset that Bourdieu's approach encourages.
During the transcription process, we used reflexive journaling to track and bracket our developing interpretations. It was important to stay true to the participants' voices, capturing not just their words, but also pauses, hesitations, laughter, gestures, language switching, and other non-verbal cues. This approach, inspired by interpretive phenomenology, helped us stay mindful of our own biases throughout the analysis. After transcribing each interview, we focused on participant 1's account, reading it multiple times while making notes in the margins to separate our interpretations from the transcript. We then did peer debriefing, considering our positionalities before we started coding. In the initial coding phase, we kept details to what was important to the participant, not ourselves, and recorded those insights in the margins. This allowed us to spot emerging themes through ongoing discussion. Next, we refined these themes, combining similar codes into broader categories. To stay true to our participant-led process, we didn't bring in Bourdieusian theory until after we had analysed all the transcripts. We then coded across the sample to identify patterns relating to how participants navigated Japan's neoliberal education system. Only after this did we integrate Bourdieu's theory of practice, organising the themes around its key concepts, like how participants position themselves in the educational, vocational fields, how capital shaped their practices, and how neoliberal assumptions were challenged or reinforced. Throughout, we asked ourselves reflexive questions to ensure we weren't imposing our own views on the data. Were we reflecting the participants' lived experiences, or were we influenced by our own biases as researchers? This process aligned with Bourdieu's idea that rigorous sociological practice requires constant self-examination.
Cheers, Chris. Okay, so pivoting now to our results. In the first results section, navigating and responding to internationalization, Kikokushijo, or returnee students who spent their formative years abroad, often struggle to reintegrate into Japan's education system. Kaito, Haruto, and Sayori, who spent time in Germany, the US, Mexico, and Italy, respectively, exemplify this challenge. Each of them faced barriers due to Japan's rigid educational structure, which favoured students who follow local educational pathways. The difficulty that they encountered shows the tension between their foreign experiences and the rules of the Japanese educational system, so, dogs out. Their habitus, shaped by overseas schooling, did not align with Japan's norms, making reintegration difficult. Kaito and Haruto's experiences illustrate how their foreign education were not valued within Japan's educational field, highlighting the hierarchical nature of cultural capital locally. Haruto's comparison of Japanese education to Harvard, for instance, emphasizes the different logics of educational fields, while Sayuri's decision to pursue international schooling shows her agency in navigating the system despite economic barriers. Her reflections on the cost of international education illustrate how financial constraints limit access to these opportunities, reinforcing class hierarchies, or, as Bourdieu puts it, social reproduction. Bourdieu's theory about neoliberalism, which targets elite schooling, helps us understand how international schools serve as sites of social reproduction. Haruto's comment about the high cost of international schooling underscores the economic privileges tied to access, while Irie's mention of scholarships introduces conditional access to elite spaces, further reinforcing exclusivity in education. Despite their struggles, students maintain a critical yet pragmatic stance towards global education reform. Haruto and Akiko reflect on the inequalities inherent in globalization, acknowledging that while global education provides opportunities, it also reinforces unequal power dynamics. Haruto points out how Japan's elites maintain the status quo, hindering meaningful educational reform, while corporations benefit from international cultural capitals. Meanwhile, Kaito's belief that his international experience gave him an edge in Japan's job market demonstrates the symbolic value of internationalization and how it aligns with the global knowledge economy standards.
Now we're going to look at the second results section, study abroad as a catalyst for personal identity. In Japan, studying abroad is seen as a way for students to gain the international capital and skills needed to compete in the global workforce. This goal influenced participants' choice in secondary education, with many opting for schools that offered international studies programs and study abroad opportunities. Kaito, Emiko, Ryo, and Akiko's decisions to choose internationally focused schools reflect the idea that global exposure enhances one's chances for success. Kaito, for example, sought a school with an international studies program to build cosmopolitan capital. Similarly, Emiko's choice was motivated by the prospect of studying abroad, seeing it as a way to position herself strategically within Japan's competitive education system. Ryo's high school capitalized on the global trend, promoting itself as an international hub. For Akiko, studying abroad was the key reason for her choice of school, signaling a shift in how Japan's educational system now values intercultural experience alongside traditional academic rankings. English proficiency too was a key motivation. Kaito viewed it as essential for global success, while Emiko's parents hoped it would broaden her horizons. Sayuri, in contrast, critiqued short-term study abroad programs, arguing that real language learning requires sustained engagement. Akiko's desire to immerse herself in Western culture reflects the prestige tied to Anglospheric capital, using it as a marker of distinction. However, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted many participants' plans. The cancellation of study abroad opportunities created confusion and frustration, particularly for Akiko, Sayuri, and Ryo, who had based their futures around these international experiences. For Emiko, the disruption revealed the inherent inequalities of access to global capital, where some students were able to go abroad while others were left behind. Despite the emotional strain, Ryo responded by adapting his plans, demonstrating resilience in the face of unexpected challenges. Akiko's sense of disempowerment, on the other hand, highlighted the deep connection between her self-worth and her accumulated international capital.
Okay, regarding our final results section, gurōbaru jinzai as a catalyst and constraint. So, Japan's educational policies aim to cultivate gurōbaru jinzai, global talent, to strengthen the country's global economic and political standing. The Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry identifies cross-cultural understanding, foreign languages, and traits such as independence, responsibility, and perseverance as crucial for a globally competitive workforce. Participant definitions of gurōbaru jinzai reflect these priorities, with many emphasizing cultural understandings and English proficiency as key elements for success in the labour market. However, this emphasis on English raises concerns about the marginalization of native languages and reinforces English's dominance in international fields. Some participants, like Akiko and Emiko, expand the concept of gurōbaru jinzai beyond language to include traits such as assertiveness, logical thinking, and self-expression. These qualities align with neoliberal values of self-management and individual responsibility, reflecting how Japanese education shapes students into self-enterprising agents, which is probably more of a Foucauldian perspective, but it definitely connects to what we're talking about here. However, these traits often conflict with Japan's cultural norms, which emphasize introversion, social harmony, or wa, and group cohesion. The tension between these cultural expectations and the global market's demands for extroversion and risk-taking becomes a significant challenge, as pointed out by participants like Airi and Ryo, who note that Japanese people are often seen as shy or introverted, traits that can hinder their adaptability within global contexts. Kasumi's desire to take action reflects a growing recognition of the need to adjust her mindset for the globalized workforce. This personal development illustrates how students internalize neoliberal values, taking responsibility for improving their skills to meet market demands. Despite these efforts, participants like Ryo and Emiko express dissatisfaction with Japan's education system, pointing to a lack of English proficiency and a disconnect between the government's global ambitions and the reality of Japan's rote learning methods. Sayuri and Haruto also highlight this symbolic struggle, where students must navigate the conflicting pressure of traditional education and the push for global competencies. These tensions reveal a broader issue. Japan's education system, with its focus on rote memorization, is not adequately preparing students to meet the demands of the global labour market.
So, by looking at these experiences as a whole, we can see how the internationalization of Japanese education and labour, shaped by market forces, redefines academic goals around academic needs. Traditional values in Japan, such as diligence, perseverance, and social harmony, merge with neoliberal imperatives. As seen in participant testimonies, Japan's push for intercultural competence, English fluency, and personal enterprise aligns with the demands of the global knowledge economy, shifting education from holistic development to market-driven outcomes. Neoliberalism promotes meritocratic self-enterprise, but it also deepens the divide between those with the resources to succeed in a globalized world and those left behind. Participants in prestigious institutions had access to overseas experiences and advanced English skills before enrolling, reinforcing the gap between the cosmopolitan haves and the domestic have-nots. This creates an education system where the linguistic and intercultural skills are commodified, and students must adapt their personal agency to fit global economic expectations. The state's push for capital accumulation through education turns it into a competitive arena where cultural capital, defined by global language and skills, becomes a symbol of success. While some participants, like Sayuri and Haruto, critique the focus on globalism as shallow, others, like Kasumi and Ryo, internalize neoliberal self-optimization. Kasumi's desire to take action illustrates how individuals navigate neoliberal pressures by aligning with market-driven goals, yet still retain agency in interpreting these demands. Despite efforts to make internationalization more accessible through funding and study abroad programs, inequalities persist, particularly for students without the financial means to participate in global exchange programs. To democratize access, we recommend exploring alternative models like collaborative online international learning, or COIL, which offers a cost-effective way to gain intercultural experience without leaving Japan. If MEXT continues prioritizing economic growth, a more balanced approach to internationalization, One that values equitable access alongside economic imperatives could better integrate humanistic values into global education. In doing so, interculturality should be seen not as a privilege for the few, but as an accessible goal for all, regardless of social or economic background.
Okay, so in conclusion, regarding conclusion and limitations, this study explored how students at a TGUP institution navigate Japan's internationalization of educational labour. Using Bourdieu's theory of practice, we found that globalism presents both opportunities and constraints, with students balancing external expectation and personal aspiration. Returnees face challenges reintegrating Japan's rigid system, often opting for private international schooling, which reinforces the link between privilege and success. Overseas experience were deemed necessary yet stratifying. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed the fragility of cosmopolitan capital, leaving students frustrated by their inability to study abroad. Japan's push for gurōbaru jinzai, meanwhile, clashes with cultural norms like introversion and collectivism. And English proficiency is viewed as critical but inadequately supported by state education. Thus, Japan's internationalization policies create a paradox. Globalism is encouraged but remains inaccessible for many, which in turn becomes an elite pursuit. Our findings show the tensions between globalization policies and lived experiences. We recommend that policymakers shift the responsibility from individuals to institutions, ensuring broader access to global competencies. Expanding online models such as COIL could democratize intercultural learning. While our study has limitations, focus on a single department at one university and potential language issues, as well as a purposefully limited sample, it reveals a disconnect between policy and practice. To cultivate genuine gurōbaru jinzai, MEXT should implement deeper reforms that prioritize holistic student development over economic interest. So, on behalf of myself and Chris, thank you for taking time to attend our presentation. We hope it contributes to meaningful discussions on the future of Japanese internationalization and its implications for students. If you're interested, feel free to reach out and we'll send you this study once it's published. Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye.